we have in the first reading a classical example of the Lord's long vision of things. Immediately one would have thought that putting Joseph in a cistern and leaving him there would have been the end of the story. But God had a long view of things, and we have in this sequence of readings, of which we have a very moving passage right now, that revelation of Joseph to his brother. But already we had the other day the moment in which he recognized them, because they'd come from food all the way from Canaan to Egypt, where by then he'd grown in authority, and he was unable to control his tears because he knew who they were and they didn't recognize him. And he went out and wept, but he still didn't say who he was. And in this reading, he discloses himself. And we have all the emotions there of the Hebrew. Big wailing noises, and all the Egyptians heard it. And God, of course, was using that sequence of events to save Israel from famine, but it wasn't going to stop there. You know the story. Eventually, the people of Egypt, through this invitation given, at that point, started to come into Egypt and then to grow into a nation, and from there would come the preparation of a holy people, would be taken out of Egypt hundreds of years later under Moses, and formed for 40 years in the desert, isolated therefore from contamination from Egyptian gods, and then God would have access to them to form a people of his own with correct teaching about him. One God, the one who is. And of course, that was a way of preparing the way in which the Lord would be born into a sequence of events already able to hold the basis of correct teaching to which he would give the fullness. Now remember that when talking to people of other cultures, because they're not coming from that. In this area already you would have a fairly high proportion of people coming from a very different background, e.g. Islamic background and other things by now as well. They're not coming from that at all. And so we have to be aware that when talking to people, we have serenely the centuries behind us. And in this place, as you were pointing out just now, in a very big way, we have those centuries behind us, with this ancient monastic setting just outside, with hundreds and hundreds of years of prayerful history behind it. That's the security we have. We don't have to raise our voice. We have the security of the centuries and of the saints. Now remember, the saints, if you like, the Christian family, are in the majority, but they're on the other side. If you look at the graph of humanity, it's only a proportion, and a small proportion, actually on this side of eternity. The great majority is on the other side numerically, waiting for us to join them. And it's important to remember that, even if we're young and small, that actually we're not here for that long compared with that huge map of time which is eternity. And when those ancient buildings were being built, time was actually fairly short. People didn't live all that long at that time. And where I live, I'm just in front of New Grange. There they lived even less, probably about 40 years, because there were no medicines. And so that's how short life was. We presume that we're here for a long time. Well, we're not. So in that context, it's important to get our act together while we still have time. Now, I just want to talk about one or two things which hit me when reading the Gospel. It's the commissioning of these 12 apostles or disciples. What's going on there is that they're actually being sent to prepare the Lord's way as he comes, and they're told to go without any baggage. Now, that was taken literally by you-know-who, St. Francis. They went off barefoot and without baggage. And actually, for a long time, until not that long ago, you would still see in Catholic countries, Italy for instance, a Franciscan going around the town with a big sack. He was going in search of alms and provisions because they were taking literally this element of owning nothing and not handling money. They depended on providence. Now that actually had a double effect. What happened is that these holy friars would go around from house to house, and actually into the houses quite often, and be very close to the people. In fact, they still call me back every year to Italy to do something similar, because right through Italy, every year about Eastertide, theoretically all the houses and flats and shops are blessed. It's a very Catholic country on that level still, because it's in the ethos of the country. They still expect it, and they still call all the priests back who can do it. It's a massive mobilization of priests throughout the country. But it does mean that you actually go into their homes, into their offices, into their shops with holy water, and very few say no, it's a part of the culture. And you meet them where they're at. And it's very important that we do what those Franciscans used to do, and which you would see having an effect. They would not preach so much by big long words, but by a presence. Because the children in particular used to see joy in their faces and the warmth of Jesus Christ. And without any huge vocations drive, as we have now, people would actually respond because they wanted that for themselves. They saw somehow there was goodness there, and I like the joy feeling, and they would go after this goodness without any fuss or bother. That's how it was done, and it used to work. But I would leave that with you, my friends, because often it's not what you say that actually counts, but it's the feeling, even the odour that you give off. That attracts or repels. And no matter what you're saying, if you're not radiating that healing, you're a heavyweight. In Wales, where I come from, there was also, and it's still there actually, but not as much as it used to be, a very strong element of what the Franciscans took with them of popular preaching. I still saw it sometimes in Italy when I was there. You'd have a Franciscan who'd come and really launch into the old mode, you see, very dramatic. People love that in Italy. The more you do the waving of the hands, the better. Yeah. But it was still also in Italy, in Wales, until fairly recently, in their own mode, in the Welsh language in particular. But I happened to pick this up this morning. Just an example of the kind of thing that would happen and which would actually have a huge effect. But listen to this. When I was about your age, actually, I was taken to the church where this actually happened, this scene I'm about to quote. It's somewhere in mid-Wales. It's still standing, the church. It's called Talgarth. And there this scene happened. And it was going to set off a huge explosion. It was the year 1735. Now, what was going on? It was the local church, which therefore in those days would have been Anglican, and the clergyman, his name was Price Davis, the vicar, was preaching. He was urging everyone present to get ready for the following Sunday, which was Easter. It was Palm Sunday. So, here he is. And this is taken from the notes of somebody who was listening. Our parish minister was using arguments to prove the necessity of receiving the sacrament. And in answering objections which people make against going to it, such as are not being fit and so on, this is the one who's taking these notes, I resolved to go to the Lord's table the following Sunday, being Easter Day. And by his saying, that is the vicar, if you are not fit to come to the Lord's table, you are not fit to come to church, you are not fit to live, you are not fit to die. I was convinced and resolved to leave my outward vanities. Now, for you here in Ireland, you probably wouldn't realise what's going on at that point, but it was Palm Sunday 1735. It was the beginning of what swept the whole of Wales and made it as it is now. Because what happened at that point was the person listening, his name was Hywel Harris, was completely ignited and went round Wales preaching just like that in a very powerful way and put the whole of Wales on fire along with others who had the same experience. And then it became, as it is now, Methodist rather than Anglican. But it's just to explain how a word can actually change history. So remember that. Don't waste your words and don't fill your mind with too many words, because you who are young, if you're not careful, will go through life plugged in all the time to empty words. And if you do, you won't hear words anymore. When we were younger, it wasn't quite so complicated, because there were fewer words in the air and you could quietly read a book more calmly than you can now. Because young people have too many words and can't sit still.
Description or something.